At the beginning of the film 8½, the protagonist Guido is stuck in traffic, surrounded by numerous faces that either stare at him, scrutinize him, or ignore him. It is unclear whether Guido, trapped in his car, seeks help or a sense of solidarity from these individuals. This opening scene represents Fellini's distinctive style, where his constant fascination with portraying people's faces is a prominent theme in his work. In a subsequent scene, Guido is at a thermal station, and the camera pans over a multitude of faces that look directly into the lens and wave, creating a sense of benevolence. However, in a scene closer to the end of the film, when Guido has to give a press conference on the film, which he doesn't believe he can make, the faces of journalists and curious individuals become inquisitorial, aggressive, and accusing. They all demand something from Guido that he feels unable to provide. Interestingly, the table separating Guido and the journalists is made up of a mirror. During the course of the press conference, Guido, at one point, lowers his gaze and verifies his reflection in the mirror. Fellini's passion for faces is evident throughout his career, as he originated as a caricaturist long before he ever became a director. The connection between caricature and character is deeply rooted in Italian culture, dating back to ancient times in the tradition of Italian masks. As part of an ancient theatrical form that became codified in the 16th and 17th centuries, actors wore characteristic masks that had a particular accent and character specific to each city or region. Predominantly comedic and popular, this form of theater reflected the diversity of Italian culture and provided a unifying ground for a country that was still partitioned. These masks were particularly significant in the city of Venice, a centuries-old center of cultural exchanges and crossroads. The actors who wore these masks were part of itinerant theater companies that performed in different cultural settings and contributed to mutual comprehension between urban and rural communities. These improvisational theater actors were roughly akin to circus performers, and the circus, with its masks, soon developed in Italy as well. It is almost impossible to distinguish between the face and the mask in the case of these itinerant performers, to the point where their interpretation is so realistic that the character becomes the person. We can see this fusion, tinged with a melancholic hue, in Picasso's portraits of circus workers during his Pink period. Picasso himself developed the idea of the face as a mask even more aggressively in the important work Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, where the masks become tribal masks of African origin rather than European tradition. But if we have to think of the mask artist par excellence, we must think of James Ensor, an artist truly obsessed with the confusion between face and mask, to the point where, in his portraits, the real person's face is often surrounded, almost suffocated by masks. His self-portrait is made this way, too. His face is lost in a veil of masks, almost indicating the indifference of value between mask and real face. His masterpiece, The Entry of Christ into Brussels, is a phantasmagoria that directly recalls the Baroque idea of the world as a theater, but in a grotesque, cynical, and disillusioned way. The confusion between face and mask brings us back once again to Fellini's early career as a caricaturist. When Leonardo da Vinci draws his caricatures, he makes studies that push the human face to the borders of the animal face, connecting in some way with his naturalistic studies. Caricature, in fact, has been used throughout history as a tool to denigrate or devalue the humanity of people or social groups, but it is also derived from the wonder of the great variety of human features and their pathological deformations, both physical and psychological. A very notable example of caricature in popular culture is Chester Gould's comic strip, Dick Tracy. In this comic, which was the first publication of its kind to feature a realistic serialized strip, the author indulged in envisioning increasingly grotesque physical characteristics for the villains in the story, achieving surreal results. In this study of the human figure, or rather the human face as an object, The work of Géricault, for example, is relevant, with his portraits of madmen or his still lifes with severed heads. The studies of the Austro-German artist Messerschmitt on human expressions are also extremely interesting. It is remarkable to know that Messerschmitt's studies do not stem from a pure spirit of scientific research, but are the fruit of his own mental illness. They arise from visions and hallucinations from which the artist suffered. The need to fix the face in a portrait and continue to contemplate the face of someone who is no longer present seems to be the motive behind the great art of Roman portraiture, whose results we can still admire today in sculpture and painting, particularly thanks to the discoveries of Fayum portraits. Even after millennia, these portraits can convey the vitality of the persons they represent, also because the artists chose to represent the deceased's gaze in such a way that it directly questioned the viewer, much like the epitaphs on Roman tombs asked passers-by not to forget who was buried there. A revolutionary artist like Caravaggio decided to represent the hypnotic and almost magical features of the face looking directly at the viewer in his famous Medusa. This magical and hypnotic character of facial representation has been widely used by dictatorships and personality cults. We all know the faces of dictators, and we all know iconic representations of their faces, sometimes using different styles. For example, if Hitler chooses to be represented as an inspired prophet, Stalin does not direct his gaze directly at the viewer, assuming the protective attitude of the little father, as he liked to be called. Since the invention of photography, the portrait of the face has become an extremely widespread practice common to all social classes. The world has become populated with images and, above all, with images of faces. When artists began to investigate popular culture and develop its tropes, they often focused on images of faces, as in the case of Andy Warhol. One of the most iconic covers in pop music history, the cover of Sgt. Pepper's by the Beatles, is made up of a multitude of faces that frame the faces of the band members, in a way that recalls in some way the paintings of James Ensor, but which is also a declaration of values by the English band. An outstanding cinematic revolution was the ability to provide an intimate portrayal of the face in intense close-up, which deeply unsettled early cinema audiences. Some directors specialized in this kind of representation, such as Fellini. In particular, we can remember John Cassavetes, who even made a film called Faces, where the proximity of the camera to the actors' faces, who acted with a certain degree of improvisation, digs or tries to question their psychological depths, offering the viewer a degree of intimacy with them that is almost unusual. Another filmmaker specializing in the investigation of the face is Ingmar Bergman, who in the film Persona accompanies us in the exploration of the landscape of the faces of two actresses whose personality, however, remains enigmatic until the end of the film. The iconic image at the beginning of the film, the child caressing the projection of a female face, which we can think is the face of the mother, reminds us that the vision of the face is the first image that opens on existence when a mother bends over the newborn to care for it.